Welcome back, Patriots. I am the Math Patriot, bringing you another lesson in the fun and exciting world of high school geometry. If you haven't noticed, we are in our new green screen environment, so I can make this thing look a little more professional. I hope you guys like it. I spent a lot of work getting this whole thing set up for you guys. So anyway, moving on, we're going to be doing our trig ratios today. Now, this is our last lesson that we are not doing any sort of solving, okay? On the next lesson following this, you can go ahead and click to it in the playlist if you want to, if you already know how to do your trig ratios. We're going to actually be solving equations and showing you how these things actually relate one to another, how the angles and the sides relate to each other, and how we can use trig to solve equations we otherwise couldn't have solved. But for now, we've got to do our trig ratios. We've got to figure out how to set up all these different fractions and equations. Now, this thing is going to depend on you knowing the difference between hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. So if you don't know what those three are, if you cannot identify them consistently, go back one video and we'll help you get set up on that. Now, first off, let's go ahead and try this one out just to make sure. Hypotenuse, remember, is the one across from the right angle. So we got our hypotenuse here. Draw that angle arc in around the reference angle, which in this case we have marked theta. That's going to be angle arc here, makes the adjacent side. Arc starts with A, adjacent starts with A. That makes sense to me. Then the other side way over here across is the opposite side. Once again, if you can't do that consistently, go on back to the last video. Now, we have three trig ratios. Now, ratios are just what they sound like. They are fractions. Those three have special names. They are called sine, cosine, and tangent. Sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, you may have seen the word tangent in another context in math class. That's the line that hits a circle exactly one time. Not the exact same thing here, different use of the word tangent, so don't let those get you confused. Now, we're going to be writing these guys down quite a bit, and so they have abbreviations. Now, the abbreviation for sine is the first three letters, S-I-N. For cosine, again, the first three letters is C-O-S. And then tangent is, again, the first three letters, T-A-N. So anytime you read these, go ahead and get used to saying sine, cosine, and tangent. Sometimes you'll hear me get kind of lazy and say sine, cos, and tan, but for the most part, we'll be saying the words all the way out. So now, every single one of these is a function. If you're back in Algebra 1, you covered this whole thing. You did f of x equals, like, for example, 3x plus 7, and then you said f of 7 is 3 times 7 plus 7. You replace the x with the 7. Well, these guys are functions just like that was. So we're going to be using this exact same style of notation. So sine of theta, cosine of theta, and tangent of theta. Now, we don't always write the parentheses there. Technically, to be proper, you should, but you don't always have to write them. Now, these are the left-hand side of three separate equations. These equations, the right-hand side, are nothing more than three fractions or three ratios, which is why these are called the trig ratios. Now, the sine is going to be the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine is just going to be the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse, and the tangent is going to be the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. Now, you're going to have to memorize these in order to be pretty effective in just about any math class you take or any math problems you have. They're going to involve trig. Now, luckily, there is a nice little acronym that helps us figure it out. Now, it's going to start with the first letter of the trig function, followed by the numerator, then the denominator. So we follow it through. It's S-O-H, S-O-H, then C-A-H, and then T-O-A. So our acronym is SOHCAHTOA, which sounds a lot like a Native American name. People joke that it sounds, or they get that mixed up with Sacagawea, but anyway, SOHCAHTOA is the abbreviation there. Remember, it stands for sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Some people prefer to write it in this form, to write so that way, ka this way, and TOA, because that way it gives them the idea of this is actually a ratio, and the first letter is a numerator, the second is the denominator. So either way you write it, it doesn't matter as long as you can get them down and use this to write your equations. Now also there's all sorts of other mnemonic devices that are out there. You can just Google mnemonic device for SOHCAHTOA or for trig functions, and you'll find a whole bunch of them. Some of them are appropriate, some of them not. So just be careful with what you're getting into and where Google's leading you. So let's go ahead and take a triangle and practice doing these ratios. Actually, let's just go ahead and make these sides of a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. So my opposite side will be 3, my adjacent side will be 4, and my hypotenuse will be 5. So let's go ahead and write out all 3 trig functions. So first off, we're going to write sine of theta is equal to, let me go ahead and put my fraction bar, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Well, opposite side I've already labeled is 3 over hypotenuse is 5. So sine of theta is 3/5. Cosine of theta is equal to, well, adjacent over hypotenuse is 4 divided by 5. So 4/5. Tangent of theta is equal to opposite over adjacent, so 3 over 4. Right? It's that simple. That's how you write your trig functions. Okay. Now let's go ahead and practice this with a new triangle. Let's go ahead and draw it out. And this time I'm going to put theta up in this corner. Now, also I'm going to make these sides, let's just make it 5, 12, and 13. I know it's not drawn to scale. So, first off, to practice, let's go ahead and label our sides. Until you get really good at this, it's a good idea to label your sides every single time you do one of these. Hypotenuse is still here. Angle arc adjacent is there. And then my other side across will be opposite. So let's go ahead and figure out all of these. I'm going to go ahead and set the problem up. Now, sine of theta, I'm going to go ahead and write SOHCAHTOA here so that we have it. Sine is opposite divided by hypotenuse. So 12 divided by 13. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent is 5 over hypotenuse is 13. And tangent is opposite over adjacent, which makes 12 over 5. Okay? And just for practice sake, I'm going to go ahead and label this alternate side over here 5. Now, if I change my point of view, if I change my reference angle, well, all that does is it swaps out my opposite and adjacent side. So now this one over here is adjacent, and the one on the left is my opposite side. So now whenever I write sine of phi, cosine of phi, and tangent of phi, well, sine is opposite over adjacent. Opposite is now 5 over 13. Cosine is now 12 over 13. And tangent is going to be 5 over 12. I know I went through that one a little bit faster than normal, but it's the exact same thing. It's an opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, etc. Now, something I want you to notice here. Whenever I change reference angles within the same triangle, notice that the sine of theta is exactly the same thing as the cosine of phi. Whenever I change points of view, the sine and cosine values just swap places. Also, the cosine of cosine of theta is equal to the sine of phi. And one more thing, notice that this one, these two are just reversed. The numerator and the denominator have been switched. They're just the reciprocals. So there we go. That's all we have to do to identify our trig functions. In the next video, we're going to teach you how to use these things to solve equations. Here's a hint. If you can do this, And if you can cross multiply and divide, then you can solve just about any trig function that I give you. So, or that any of your teachers give you. So that's it for now. See you in the next lesson. As for now, stay patriotic.